Well, I'm really delighted to be here, and I don't know technology, but I'm a fan, and I certainly am looking to see how we can optimize technology to help people with depression. And I will just wait for a second. So I'm going to use my time, because after yesterday, to kind of frame the problem and to look at one solution and to see how technology and all of these new developments might make what we do better. Because I think what I've learned over 20 years of doing this is that the technology is key, that the ideas are easy. You can be very philosophical about what we do for psychiatric disorder. There's no issue that these are important problems, but unless we understand the signal and we have precision, we can talk all we want because we'll make no progress. So just some disclosures. I only talk about things that aren't approved, that require regulation. We use everybody's devices. There's a patent involved, and I consult to Abbott, which hopefully is going to try to do this again commercially. So what is a problem in depression? When we're talking about treatment-resistant depression, it's not a pathological diagnosis. It means that you haven't gotten better on anything that we have to offer you. That can be because you aren't matched to the treatment that's best for you, and that's a whole other conversation about precision. And I think this audience understands precision more than most. But I want to just have you in a second, in a third person perspective, think about what is the core symptoms of this disorder. It's a disorder, it's not a disease. And when you think about why would someone have an implant, it's because the sensation you feel and your capacity to do anything about it is impossible. And if you have, as William James said about his own depression, or William Styron wrote in his books, or every person who writes about this experience enough to spend time to write a book about it, it's an active anguish. It's not just a negative state. There is something that is positively on that they want turned off. And the thing that to me is most salient, particularly for this group, is, there are thoughts involved, but it's a negative feeling and you can't move away. If you're having a negative interaction with someone, what do? You walk away. If something is uncomfortable, you move. I mean, this is the BCI community. You think about movement. I want you all to think about what is the nature of you have a aversive signal and you cannot move. What would that feel like? If I just left the talk there and we just talked about motor mood, I want no thinking in this. I don't like talking to patients. They get me confused because all I want to know is to understand what is it that you would want a device for? Okay, that's part of what I have to make a decision about. And so then the question becomes, what is well? To me, what I hear from these people is, I need this pain to go away. I need you to get this force field away from me. I need to be able to move. And I think that's the operational thing here, not the secondary why it's happening, what I should be able to do, all that noise of rumination. Now, for many people, depression is, I want to be happy. I want clear thoughts. I want to connect to other people. For operational definition for me in this story, that's secondary. So in this kind of Venn diagram of feelings, thoughts, and actions, I care about red and blue. And the bigger thing when you're going to have an implant is it can't be a temporary thing. It needs to be that you don't relapse. And that it's expensive, it's invasive, is it dangerous? Depending what surgeon you talk to. There's a hole in your head, dead stop. Nobody wants a hole in their head. And if you don't have to have a hole in your head, then don't have one. If you need a hole in your head to have a wire put into the right place so you don't feel like this, then we shouldn't look away from it. So this idea that most people who have a depression have one episode, it's usually stress related, goes away, maybe you're treated, maybe you're not, maybe get therapy, maybe get drug, not our problem. because that's most people. Many people have a recurrent episode. Major depressive disorder versus major depressive episode. It's a series of episodes. You don't treat, they last a year, they tend to go away. Many people have an episode, they get treated, goes away. They have another episode, gets treated, goes away. They stay, we were talking about last night, I like using, like you stay in your orbital. You know, you move around, but you're not changing levels. But there's a state where people seem to, the more episodes you have, the harder it is to actually stay stable. Nobody knows why. And the question is once you've had 4 or 5 episodes, the likelihood that even if you can get better, that you'll stay better a year drops down to unacceptable levels. If you listen, you know, there's lots of treatments. You know, this story goes back 20 years. It's going to be 20 years in March with the first case. But there's probably about 10% of people who reach a state. So this is not everybody who's depressed needs an implant or needs something. And there have been these treatments since the time that we piloted this. Vagus nerve stimulation is approved. 10 years of no insurance payment, and now they're doing another 1,000 people. You know, again, it takes a year to kind of have it work. You know, the biology of that we need to understand. TMS came online in 2008. There's just been clearance for doing TMS all day for 5 days. So doing accelerated TMS may be important, but durability is something everyone's talking about. We heard Jacob's amazing idea with his epidural stem, really fascinating, and learned a lot last night at dinner. Ketamine just got approved. Again, if it works, great, works in a limited number of people. It's rapid acting, no durability or limited durability. You have to keep doing it. And the bottom line is ECT is the most effective treatment, definitely has side effects, and your options are limited, not if you don't respond to ECT, but actually the most ideal candidate is one who has responded to ECT and now no longer responds. So, you know, when I try to think about what's an organizing principle about this state, it really behaves like an attractor. And as patients describe the state they're in a hole, they're in a vortex. It's not just fell into a pit and screaming to get out. There's an active process pulling them down. It's not a weight. It's give me some ideas. But the issue is that state is active and you can't get out of that energy state. And maybe that's a way to think that many people think about depression, that if you just scramble the combination of symptoms that you can treat by symptom, I think you go off a cliff, and the combination of symptoms, once you get to where there's psychic pain and you can't move, is a different state. And I think that's what we're talking about. So we had this idea because we were studying people with depression. This was a previous 15 years of doing mapping with various kinds of imaging about people who are depressed. What's a treatment that works? What's a treatment that doesn't work? Can you have a baseline pattern that could predict what you do? And we started to converge on the relationship between a subcortical region, area 25, the subcallosal cingulate, it's agranular cortex, and its interaction with cortical regions. And you can study different treatments and look at different patterns. You can model it in all kinds of ways, but that with resting state PET and then later with resting state fMRI, that the role of the subcallosal cingulate seems to be fundamental to this state of negative mood. And this region in animals is infralimbic cortex. Monkeys, marmosets have a well-developed area 25. It's thought of as the visceral motor outflow system. So it's a pretty good region to actually mediate moving away from things that are bad, straight to the brainstem. But it has a number of interactions, and we basically said our findings were that when you're sad or you're negative, it turns up and you turn cortex off, and that's reciprocal. And when you actually get better, 25 turns down and you have a disinhibition of the cortex. And if 25 doesn't decrease the activity, you don't get well. So the idea was, if you go there and you stimulate using what was known at the time in Parkinson's, that high frequency stimulation was some kind of a depolarization block. And Andres Lozano, my surgical partner, says, you're overthinking it. You know where, don't presume to know how DBS works. And we've learned that depolarization block is not what DBS does. But what we do know is that you block locally, you excite axons, and we knew that we wanted to turn down 25 and that ... that would disinhibit everything that was connected to it that we thought was important. So we took our PET scan blob, we made an approximation of where we should put that. We, can you see it? No. Get the laser pointer. See it now? We basically estimated on an atlas. We looked at an MRI. We took a vote. We put a DBS lead in and said, okay, I'm serious. We're all good. And we had the patient awake. We turned it on and saw that actually one could get a release of this negative state. Wasn't what we thought were going to happen. We weren't expecting something immediate to happen. But what was important is we had one on each side. We turned it on. We used settings that they'd done in Parkinson's. And this is where I think we really made a good decision, not necessarily because we were smart, but because we weren't smart. We didn't know what we were doing. We turned it on and left it on and watched. And we didn't mess around. And we didn't twiddle. And we didn't try, because as soon as something started to happen, making adjustments, it wasn't like Parkinson's where you did something. So we just watched. And so you'd send people back and bring them back in a week and go, okay, you're different. Instability, someone coming in and complaining, you're the same. I'm just hearing noise. Let's see where you are. I can call you up. I can bring you back in. And you just kind of saw that over the course of 6 months, there was actually a pretty fast effect that we could get even the week in the hospital. We just had them in the hospital. We're watching, seeing what was going on. And then we did a PET scan at 3 months and 6 months. And our hypothesis was turn down area of 25. We did. And get remote changes and things that are connected to, we did. And what was really interesting, and even in these 4 responders and 2 non-responders, is that if you didn't get the remote changes, you didn't get better. So we had a clue from those first 6 people. And again, nobody likes an N of 6. Nobody likes, no control. And you have no idea what you're doing. It's safety. It's not efficacy. It's the chance to kind of figure out, what am I going to do next? And so what we did next is we ramped it up to 20 people. We were talking last night about, the phenotype of the kind of patient. The people who got better were all melancholic. They all had that low reactivity, high negative affect, psychomotor slow. The 2 people that didn't get well, one probably had more reactivity, and we debated if he didn't have bipolar type 2, which does get better. The other one clearly had primary anhedonia. He didn't have negative pain. He had disinterest, and he never had an effect. So we did it again. We enrolled more people. We did it exactly the same, open label. You got better, you stayed better. So the Toronto cohort was 20 people, PET scan, similar findings. I moved to Emory, new surgeon, new psychiatrist, new team. We didn't do quite as well. And so the other great thing is you got to have non-responders to figure out what you're really doing. If you don't have non-responders, it's great bragging rights. It's really not, because you actually don't know if anything you're doing is really right. So we had a 40% response rate at 6 months, but we had an interesting thing because the study went out 2 years, and, the psychiatrist is getting to know this. He's making an adjustment on the 4 contacts, and 2 years we had 90, most of the patients were well. And it took longer in some of them. And we sat and debated, well, gee, they got, therapists claim they did it. The psychiatrist said, oh, I adjusted the medication. And my attitude is, hey, team, we got an electrode in someone's brain. And you've made changes. Let's try to figure out what is it about where we are that might have changed, that might be informing this. And that really, that cohort and the idea that at 6 months to 2 years, there was that transformation was really important. And as we then worked that out, did another cohort, had more information about precision, we actually improved our numbers by doing less. Implanting, never changing where we're stimulating, only adjusting current based on plateauing, and we're doing better. So they had some clues. So we're doing fine, minding our own business, small samples, enough money to pay the bills. And what was happening in parallel is people were working on the ventral capsule. People were working on the medial forebrain bundle, and St. Jude Medical wanted to do what we were doing and wanted to do a trial after really the first 6 patients, premature, and trials were designed. People gave real pause when the ventral capsule pilots then went to do their first 30 patients. They bailed at 30. St. Jude got through the first 30, the breaking the blind for the FDA went fine, got to 90, had a futility analysis. There was no different active sham. The medial forebrain bundle, which seemed incredibly exciting, that they were so excited that they wanted a really fast result. They had an insertion effect, and so their short trial, flamed out. Everybody flamed out in an industry trial for something that everybody had a mousetrap to do. We all have to think about that. The group in Amsterdam said, oh, well, we got the, blinded discontinuation. No, they would have flamed out too if that was commercial. They had to make an adjustment of when stable response happened 3 times. You never would have been able to do that if you were a company. They were able to do it because they were missing something about how to reach stability. Is it where? Is it how? But whatever it is, we're doing something wrong. But what everybody learned after everybody's done complaining, after the FDA says you lose, is you had an implant. You don't take it out. You keep going. And suddenly with an implant, you learn something you never learned with a drug or non-invasive, that maybe time matters. And maybe in your Mr. Magoo, let me kind of keep trying stuff and I'll eventually hit something I can go after. If you kept it in, there were groups of people that were doing well long-term. Medial forebrain bundle, it evened out and people did well. The ventral capsule, there was a subset of people that did quite well. You can see them in the purple line. In our experience in Toronto, average 6 years, you got better, you stayed better. At Emory, now, 13 years, you got better, you stayed better. And the Broaden study, where they bailed, they had a long-term follow-up. At 2 years, they had a 50% response rate. They had just missed something. So the question is we're going to just keep doing it wrong over and over again? And is there just going to be a new mousetrap every time something that kind of has a clue doesn't work? Well, we all know the hype curve and we all live in it, like it or not. Whatever you're doing, you will fall into that pit, and hopefully not like the patients. You'll figure out a way out. And I kind of break out the way out in the following ways. It's kind of like, who do you blame for why it didn't go well? That's usually how you figure out what you're going to do next, who's going to have to do it. If you blame the psychiatrist that you don't like who they pick, take a number. They have no idea how they pick anything. We work on predictive biomarkers for all treatments. That's a slow road for engineers. If the how, the design, then you've just got to start over, and restarting a new model is complicated. The what, we're going to get to that. The where, when you're putting in a wire into the brain, I was looking at, the new BCI device, being able to cover more territory. Where is obviously vitally important to any of this. And you can take an alternative path, change strategies altogether, and that works too. But the where at this point for me is easy. And I'm a neurologist. Where is how I view the world. I mean, maps in the brain, maps in the world. You can instruct a surgeon because they want precision too. That one's easy. You're not arguing with anybody on that. So alternatives, like I said, there's a bunch of predefined targets. My guess is that a particular target where all details of precision are worked out will be best for certain kinds of clinical phenotypes. But that means that the intervention, whatever it is, needs to work, and then you can compare that. That's what happened in Parkinson's, globus pallidus versus STN. You didn't try to compare the two of them when neither one of them had the details worked out. And the really fascinating work that's going on at Baylor in one permutation with using an EMU and multiple recordings, but for a short period of time to basically do conventional DBS is one strategy, and UCSF, which says, no, put in the wires and everybody is different, and you need to figure out a person's particular programming. I think that's interesting, and I can convince you that I don't think that's necessary and actually may not be the right way to go, but that's for data to determine. So our approach was where, and we knew from the day we did that first implant that this was a convergence between a number of bundles and a number of pathways in the brain. And this is just on the back of a napkin. This is built from knowing the connectivity of Area 25 from non-human primates. In 2003, you couldn't do a tractography scan. So this was done without tractography, but inferred tractography. But what we're able to do at Emory in the first cohort with 40% is to not model responder versus non-responder, because people are non-responders for reasons other than targeting. Take responders and model what you did right and own it. And what we found is there was a common map. If you built a volume of tissue activated model that Cameron McIntyre built, you could identify what voxels were common to everybody that got well, not on average, not correlated with score. If you met criteria for well at 6 months, what voxel was in the map that we stimulated? And that became the operational definition of the target. And then when you looked at individual non-responders, you saw that people were different from that for different reasons. And that if we compared the people at 6 months who were non-responders, who were responders at 6 months, we found that actually we could see what we had fixed by actually changing where we were stimulating along the lead. We were able to construct kind of a blueprint of where you needed to be, what bundles you needed to get. You need to hit 4 bundles, cingulate bundle, uncinate fasciculus, forceps minor, and connections down to the accumbens, to the brainstem. And that then the next cohort could be prospectively targeted to hit those bundles, leave it there and look to see how you do. So to develop the template, then test the template and just be disciplined and don't touch it when it's not going well. Then you get to blame who you recruited or a parameter. And that has become the method that we use. And what that did when you looked at the outcomes is outcomes went up with less fuss. And we also started to notice as we were doing testing of what was happening in the operating room is we were starting to see very robust, fast effects that we could not appreciate with the way we'd done it before. And I just want to kind of show that we've recently looked at the out of sample, the data from the original Broaden study, have the scans, there's no tractography. We built a model with Andreas Horn's lead DBS in the human connectome. And actually, responders and non-responders in Broaden at 2 years hit the template, and the partials and the people who never had anything, surgeon totally missed. And the left side totally missed a cingulate. So this is a where problem, which is fantastic because now we can go through case by case and look to see, can we rescue that patient or would they need to be implanted? So the next stage becomes, now that we know where, we've got that variable, really important variable. Now actually the fun starts, because what we now know is that this is the cohort from our NIH study where we actually have had access 10 subjects at a time. So again, tie my hands behind my back and put a blindfold on. Let's build a model of what's happening over time with sensing, but you get to build it in one prototype, and then that prototype doesn't exist anymore. And then we'll give you another prototype and do it again. And so, but we had the PC+S, the Activa. We were able to get sampling from Area 25 in the wild. And we had a cohort of people to build this model to actually not try to do closed loop, but to just track what does the course of recovery look like? What is the signal that Area 25 is giving us? Could be that Area 25 signal isn't where you want to sense. That I just finished saying you have to be in this network. Maybe you need some remote effect. And well, we could put in more signals. The first thing is, I don't need that to get them well. So let's get an idea if there's signal where we are, because if this is a circuit, maybe there's a signal at Area 25 and we should look and see first. And so here's the cohort we had. The tractography guided stimulation, these people, stimulation just to look for safety in the OR, you had this fast effect. And then you got a little bit of regression over the month off because we wanted to see the signal over time. Turn it on, you got a good effect. And you start to get some instabilities, call it a rough patch, 2-3 months. Maybe you turn it up a little bit. Everybody sits and takes a vote. Are you having a bad week? Are you relapsing? That becomes the operational question. What's having a bad day? What's having a life stressor? You need a real adjustment. And more so, not everybody has a wobble in the same place. Here you can see the individual variability in the depression severity number. This is what's used for a trial. Here's someone that was doing great and then had a wobble here, and the yellow line is when the psychiatrist decided to turn it up. And here in the other patient, the psychiatrist decided to turn it up sooner. Why? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. Everybody, I'm looking at Megan, my NIH program officer, who was actually on my team, was the research coordinator. She sat and watched this, witchcraft go on. We didn't know. We'd vote or not vote. But that's the issue, is not just when to make an adjustment. Maybe it's a clue about, the psychiatrists talk about a rough patch. When do you start therapy? When's the window for plasticity? We're learning now, even with VNS, that VNS gives a global change in capacity for oligodendroglia, but it's activity dependent. So what's the system you want to activate to remodel? And I think the same thing is here. So now I've got a team for our grant that has clinicians. So now have a third team in New York. The team in Atlanta continues to follow the cohort there. But the important thing is most of the people on the team now are engineers or signal processors. I need clinicians to keep patients safe, and I need people to know what they're doing to figure out what we're doing. And this is an engineering question and not a clinical question. And so what are models that might account for this trajectory? Because the trajectory is funny. There is that fast effect. There is kind of this first detractor, but it's not just, as I had physicists tell me lately, it's not an attractor, because the two states, it's not just two states. You have a bistable state. You come out of the attractor and then you move into a new state that itself is not yet stable. Patients know this. There's a little cartoon on the side. Patients describe this verticality. To this patient, when he's happy, his head is above the water. He's buoyant. If you're sad, you bounce up and down. There are some waves and you go up and down, but you have reactivity and your head pops back up. But when you're angry, it's waves. But the important thing is when you're depressed, you are underwater and you can't get up. So the patients have an intuition about this, but it's metaphorical. And so the question is what kind of readouts can we have so we aren't trying to talk in metaphors with people? That we need recovery markers, we may need biomarkers, and maybe we need close loop, maybe we don't. But that becomes the operational question. And what we've been doing in the lab now, it started in Atlanta, but now seriously in New York, is how do we take as much as possible and as much as is reasonable, and look at candidate biomarkers. And like everybody else, we're trying to take advantage of both brain signals and non-brain signals, but that they have to be combined. And as I said at the beginning, I want signals where I don't have to ask a question, because if I have to ask how you're doing, that's the problem. So let's return then to how can we start to build these models? Well, again, we can listen to the patient because they did tell us that there is a switch. And we've gotten now to where we ask patients about their metaphor. What is the force field for you? What is the phenomena? So when you're in the operating room and you're monitoring yourself, you can tell us and not assume that that isn't important, but that we can look at that state change even in the operating room, because we have tractography guidance. We can put it in, check each contact for safety, then give bilateral stimulation in the target and pop people out. And what happens when you do this is that we built a model. So, cute computer science tricks with a classifier, didn't need it. You can see it in just a spectrogram, that the state of change between the beginning of surgery and looking at the local field potential and the end after 10 minutes of stim, when there's been this state change, is driven by a model that has dominantly left beta and right alpha. And the left beta is actually correlated. You see it in everybody. And actually the magnitude of that change is correlating with how they are a week later without anything else. And I took out a rodent study that I did trying to get a grant I never got back in 2010, where in rodents, we put in an infralimbic stim and did recordings in the amygdala, and we did it at different frequencies. And what did a rodent do when you stimulated there? It explored the cage, and it explored the cage in a dose-dependent way. And the signal that was, and when you turned it off, they continued to explore, maximally around 70 to 130 hertz. It was a U-shaped curve. And when you look at the signal, it's an increased theta and it's a decreased beta. It's what we actually finally got many years later in the people. Couldn't get a grant on that, couldn't get a grant on that. Now finally got, resources to be able to test it. So now the real issue is what happens over time, because getting the acute effect is interesting, but if you don't leave it on, you don't stay well. And so the question is now with the tracker, not just in the OR, we can actually look to see, one way to look at it is what happened to that decreased beta. Let's just build a model and regress it with the score. Don't use a score. The score becomes corrupted after a while, that a bad day and the actual depression interacts. So the regression models go bad, but we had data, we had data 8 times a day, but that was with stim on. We brought people into the lab once a week, turned it off, had clean signal, and built a model of weekly for 6 months. And what Chris Rizal, who many of you know, and his postdoc Shankar Alagappan did was in 5 patients where the data was good, you can see the recovery curve, and you can see there's this outlier. We had one patient who was well at the beginning and then relapsed. So we were able to build the model on the 5 that were typical and then test the model on the outlier. And what we did is we said, let's make a training set in the first month when they're still not well against the end when they were well, and build a simple classifier of, can you tell in area 25 sick from well? Well, we should have been able to, because we knew that with PET scans already, but don't know if the signal is going to be robust. And the bottom line, the classifier performed incredibly well. And then we went to say, okay, let's look now every week. We know a sick and a well state. Don't even know what it is yet. Can I see that signal week by week? Set of rules. Are you sick or well? And what you could start to see is there was a transition week where actually you switched from the sick state to the well state. And then we gave it a rule that I want stable well. Stable well meant the classifier signal 2 weeks in a row. If it wobbled for a week, it was no more than a week. Otherwise, you weren't stable. And everybody had a time that they reached stable well, and that could track with the same definition of stable well using a drop in the depression score, 50%. You do not wobble, not 1 point, for more than 1 week. And that classifier performed very well also. And if we then looked at what are the contributors to this model, it turns out it's dominated by beta and gamma. And that's an important clue, because maybe that can be used in a more simple way. But the most interesting thing is that, like in the OR, where you have this early beta decrease, if you just plot the beta over time, the beta was a decrease like the acute effect in the OR until it transitioned. And the chronic stable state was actually a dominant beta gamma increase. So early and unstable was a change, but not the permanent change. And so how we interpret that, we're not sure, but this is a phenomena we're seeing with other kinds of readouts. With PET, the earliest effect are the default mode changes. There's a direct connection of area 25 into the ventral medial part of the default mode, that the anterior part changes early and the posterior part changes late. And that's just in one system. And so again, this phenomena of necessary and sufficient, one model, how to kind of tease it apart, how to use the clinical experience to do it. What does that mean? Why do people have different rates of reaching stability? Well, we can go back to animal models. People have known for a long time that stress has impact on infralimbic hippocampus. You get dendritic spine regression, that social isolation actually demyelinates. Study back in 2000, postmortem brain in depressed people, oligos are the problem, neurons aren't the problem. And it's in this area of the brain. If you give ketamine, you grow new spines in a day. If you give stimulation, as Michelle Monchi is, and she's given a keynote on Tuesday at 5 o'clock, I was inspired, 10 years ago by their paper showing that high frequency stim optogenetically in M2 will turn on oligodendroglial progenitor cells. They make oligos, they migrate, they make myelin, you get better behavior. And we've now done this in a monkey. Satoka Fujimoto is presenting this on Sunday. Stimulation, ipsilateral, in area 25 in a rhesus, doing functional MRI before and after 2 months of stim in normal monkey, looking at white matter diffusion maps and functional connectivity. You get a change in functional connectivity in default mode, like people, and you get a change in white matter. And she's just hot off the press yesterday, is actually finding that there's ipsilateral in the bundle, changes in oligos, mature and immature, and changes in staining for myelin. So we are getting structural plasticity with STIM, and it's local and it's remote. And we're seeing that time to well in our patients. These are maps, these blue blobs is within the areas we're stimulating. The magnitude of the white matter abnormality determines how long it is to reach stability. So there's a certain intuition on that. So the thing now is how to use this utility wellness marker. I don't need closed loop. What I need is to know, when do I make an adjustment? When is it having a bad day? And when do you leave it alone? So one can start to see that if you're losing stability in that beta gamma, you might turn it up or might make an adjustment. That's not in evidence, but that now becomes a testable hypothesis. So I just want to use this next period to talk about, okay, we've got this brain signal. I'm obviously talking to anybody I can where, would it be good to have an epidural something? What else could you measure? Maybe we need a readout of the non-depression part. We call it the little d. Little d gets you in trouble. That's why you go to the therapist. You need the big D to kind of know, when is it stable, that depression is out of the pit, but now like your life is happening. And And I don't know that you want to be treating every hangnail. That's a strategy. If you never felt bad, you probably wouldn't be depressed. But I kind of find, I don't know, angst is useful at times, but I don't want to be stuck in it. I don't want to wallow in it. And the question is, there is a signal for that because we study rumination, we study sadness. It's part of Area 25. That's how we found it. But its confederates are probably not the same as those that get you stuck. And I think that's the next operational definition. But what we started to do, because we were doing these videos, because people said cool stuff, so we were recording it. That was the main reason we did it. And then we got the idea because we had, we met Dr. Namadi, who was new in the computer science department, and he was doing classifiers of naturalistic things, and his graduate student, Sahara Haradi, we basically had them look at our videos and build models of the doctor's always looking at how someone looks. Maybe we can build a model of facial expression. You know, Duchenne, Darwin, we've known about, can tell when someone's sick. And being sad is not being depressed, but we all use that intuition with people. We built a model to try to say the rough patch, wellness, and sickness. No one in the lab without hearing language could look at the face and distinguish that. So we threw it and they built a classifier, and the classifier couldn't find it either. What was labeled as the rough patch, distress, the transition, was just as likely to be sick as well. So there was 2 states in terms of the classifier that was built, and that became something really important. Sahar ran out of time, and she never had explainability of what her model was picking up. So cool model, not very helpful, but an intuition that really guided the next phase. And what we really want is, we know a lot about how the face works and how the face moves. And, you know, there are fights about face emotion and how many emotions are there and are they innate? No, but we know how the face works. And whether it's to make a diagnosis of, do you have Bell's palsy or stroke, to, we all know that mass face of Parkinson's, that this is one of our patients, this thing you can't even do to yourself when the muscles in your forehead change, that the intuition about what is automatic face is in the cingulate, is in the midline. The volitional face is in the lateral cortex on the cortical surface, and they control different aspects of face movement. And Steve Heisig, who is in the lab formerly at IBM and building these kinds of models, built a model in the data that we had for the brain signal, and he could build a model on sick and well with, you know, features from the face, mostly with action units and dynamics of action units, and actually could classify as well as the brain, but everybody needed their own model rather than a general model that we had for the brain. He could look at the consensus of which features in the face were really across the board. And it's the thing that Duchenne and Darwin would tell you. And actually, the face correlates with the brain. And the face correlates with the score. And the brain doesn't correlate as well with the score. So the thing is, the face and the brain is actually telling us the most information. And so that now what we're doing at Sinai is we're taking advantage of how we can look at models of how things work. Where in the next generation, we just finished the 10th patient with the Summit platform, which also has been retired, but that patients are now recording their signal at home twice a day with their own video, with doing measures of how they're doing, wearing watches. And again, here's our group of 10. We still have 3 in treatment, the same pattern. I mean, this is just a broken record now. Put it in the right place, turn it on in the OR, get this rapid effect. And now actually the last 4 patients, we've actually turned them on when they leave the hospital the next day. And we're getting people who are really looking good 3-4 days. So we now are building more elaborate models. We're looking at the videos where we both have matching what they're doing at the time. We have the patient scores, we have the physician-sponsored scores, we're looking at natural language processing, we're looking at acoustic figures. Have a field day. Patients We have lots and lots of data. And this just gives you a proof of principle. They did this just last week. New data scientist, Audrey in the lab working with Steve, they built, there's now a model. You used to have to actually pay money to have a transcription. New Whisper model, you can pop in any language and get really reliable transcriptions very fast. Then through that model into this Go Emotions to get some emotions feature. And I want to argue about whether or not you like models of emotion, but they're built with big data sets, and you can plot them and look over time at what the nature of facial expression and natural language processing is. And you can see the emergent processes of negative going away when positive comes online. And these are more than just happy, sad, and that one can actually look at the behavior and match up timing of what's a bad day, what's actually a depression relapse according to rules, and start to really build these models. The other thing we're playing around with, and I love this, is I met a designer who works in gaming, and she also designs in COVID. She designed recharge rooms for healthcare workers in the institution where they could go and relax. And what she built in the Unreal Engine for us is a naturalistic forest, where basically using your hands, you can move around the environment and it will capture the data. So what I wanted was a way that we could study foraging in the unknown, because that's what anhedonia is. You don't take a chance. You don't move. You don't look for rewarding things. You don't explore. It also works for people with Parkinson's. Where can we get movement kinetics rather than kind of the usual way? And this room allows us to do a lot of things. You can see Steve playing around with one of the elements. So you can build models of movement in this way across diagnoses. And let me just go to the next one for time. And I want to see it. Oh, I lost a picture. But basically, someone standing, drawing circles, getting feedback, have them draw 6 circles. We can build a model on the accelerometer on the wrist. This is a very simple model. At the beginning, you can see very irregular ways they draw the circles. They kind of lose gas, turn the stim on, they become very fast. Just a simple accelerometry movement. You can get a lot of intuition. It goes away with no stim, turn it on, it gets faster, more regular, and then after a while, they get a very systematic movement. We've now, with Helen Downs in the lab, she's been using open pose, which I saw a poster on in the back, that instead of using Connect cameras, and being limited to the joints, you can build the models on movement of the entire person. And actually it's got the best intuition that if you're just looking at the mean duration of a circle, you don't see a lot of variance over the 6 months. They come in once a month, but you can start to see when you look at the variance of whatever kind of circle you do, you become more precise, you have less variance over time. So I'm just going to finish that. I think that having these readouts, seeing these time activity curves that are very different, I think it is, I didn't think about it till just now. I've chosen a movement metaphor for a brain problem, but it is the same. When you break your leg, first thing you do is you got to align the bone. And aligning the bone, you don't run the marathon. You align the bone and then you let it heal. And when you heal, you still don't run the marathon. You need a test to know the bone is healed. And then you start using it and it hurts and you still don't run the marathon. You start doing what it takes to train up your new leg in your new state. You need to actually have the brain move into a state. When is it in a state to do the heavy lifting, which is rehab, to really learn how to use your brain, which now is in a state that they haven't had in a very long time. They need to trust it. They need to know it's not going to go back, that every bad day isn't the clue that they're relapsing. And that's a process. And we need to have signals that help us do that. So I'll just end where I did at the beginning with the patient. The patients get what sickness is and what chaos is. And they will tell you, and I love this from this patient who's working as a pharmacist. She goes, in her husband, her this, whatever. You know, it's people have issues. We all have issues. And what she says is just nothing like it was before. I'm just trying to figure it out, who I am, where I'm headed. Sometimes I'm unhappy and I'm definitely overwhelmed, but I'm not sick. And I think our job is to figure out what they mean by that, because they know, and we do a bad job of knowing, and then we can really help them and move this to the next stage. Now stop there.
Thank you, wonderful. Any questions from audience? We can stop.
Sorry.
Thank you, very interesting. Two questions. It's difficult to do farming settings. So you say that you only increase. I mean, you only touch the intensity, right? Never occurred to you that cycling could be better than.
Oh no,
never
it definitely could be better. So what I kind of probably should have done as a last slide is, what can we now know that now I've got a signal? Now actually we can start at the beginning and tune it like a radio. I mean, you can't, if you're dependent on the patient self-report to know if you're going to do it. We learned at the beginning, as soon as you clicked in, you couldn't make an adjustment and you couldn't force it back in the other direction. We tried, like in Parkinson's, oh, let's just turn it. We flipped them, let's just turn it down to low frequency. We should have it come back. You know, it doesn't work that way. So now that we have the signal, I think the next experiment I'll talk at my program in the back is, now you actually have the signal that you could use. You could look to see whether or not the optimal parameters are 130 hertz. We always use it. And you might actually, with a different setting or at a different point when you have the transition, make a change or do it with cycling or do any one of a number of ways, because now we've got a signal that we can tune on. And then we don't have to use a self-report. I don't even think I would use a read. I would use the brain itself, but I know what I'm tuning. And I think then exploring the parameter space becomes a much more tractable problem. We put in our grant that we were going to make a big grid and we would do this, and there was just no way. We just got lost. But I think now that we have the signal, and actually we've applied the classifier to the RC plus S data, and it's working. So even though the fidelity of the recording is different, timing is different, it tends to work. I'm looking at the beta signal on the left just as a fast and dirty, you know, monitor of, are they stable or are they unstable, unstable? And we've made some beginning decisions based on that. And we'll see. We'll build another model with the new data, but we'll have the percept soon and we can do that. And then I think do what you're saying.
Good question. Is there any side effects on the side effect of stimulation?
So what's really interesting is that even when you turn up the current in people who aren't responding, I've had it up to 10 milliamps, there's no side effects. So you either turn something off acutely or you don't. But to have so it behaves very differently than in the medial forebrain bundle, where you turn it up a little bit and you see double, or in the ventral capsule where you get hypomanic. So I can't explain it. We're going straight to the hypothalamus and the brainstem. I don't understand that. So I do think the reset is a really critical part. And then it's actually promoting plasticity in the new state, because it doesn't make a lot of sense not to see side effects. When you turn it off, also, the decay function is days to weeks. It's not hours to days.
Okay, we will one of the questions from online audience.
Is there something I should read?
Yes, there's some chat questions here.
Can you talk about the stimulation thing? Okay, so there's a question again. It's like the first question about frequencies. We did 130 hertz based on well, that's what everybody starts with, that there's, we've never deviated. Like I said, in the rodent, that when you looked at 2 hertz was the only thing that really didn't give much of a beta, gamma, or the theta beta change, and that you started to see it above 70 hertz. We did a frequency experiment in the early days. And again, you can't actually classify the difference of the signal change using actually the finding we have at different frequencies acutely. So I think again, that's the answer to that question. So it is an infinite parameter space. I think the only way you do this, if you don't have a high fidelity, if you don't have a tremor where you can sit and see the signal, you just got to jump in and try something, get your main signal, and then come backwards and do it. Otherwise, you just drowned in making decisions that you have no reliability on.
One more.
There are 2 more here.
Naive question. Is anyone using feedback for analysis? Neural firing data collected from the plant? Yes. So the group at UCSF basically does implants throughout these kind of putative targets. They look and monitor negative affect moment to moment. So they build a model on how you're feeling. And then they learn that there's a gamma. They look to see which region has the most robust response. Then they test whether or not stimulation can attenuate that and relieve symptoms. And then patient goes home, they build their models, they bring them back, they put in an RNS. And the first case that was in Nature Medicine showed that recording from the amygdala, stimulating in the nucleus accumbens could attenuate the increasing gamma in the amygdala that went with negativity. The thing is that it goes off for 2 minutes. They got into trouble with the patient really liked it. So they couldn't have it at night because the patient couldn't sleep. They limited the number of times it could go off to 300 a day. They're getting a cycle of kind of ramping up and ramping down that should have familiarity to people in terms of that kind of intracranial self-stim model. But patient got better, and we'll wait to see. That was one case. I've heard they have cases that aren't showing that same thing. So we'll see what they get. They have a grant. So that model is there. I think you can take different models that you can build. And I think knowing, but again, is interrupting an acute signal the same as allowing the brain to remodel over time? I think there are different signals. And I think attenuating and pushing beta gamma down every time it starts to rise may be actually interrupting the very signal you're trying to achieve, which is moving into this other state. And that's testable. I think that's something we'll try to do by building. We'll have those same daily measures of mood to actually look at the difference between mood instability and the depression state. And I think that conversation is going to continue.
I suggest we go.
Okay.
Because thank you so much for wonderful. Okay, so our next speaker, she will be speaking via Zoom, Dr. Kyani from Abbott, and her talk will focus on using the AI for predicting the pain response, pain perception, and in response to also the spinal cord injury stimulation in chronic pain. Dr. Kyani, it's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you. That's my pleasure. I still can't. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh, here it is. Good, we take us over now. This one. Which one?
Okay, we can see you right now. You can share your screen. Okay, thank you.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. Let me go full screen and let's get it started. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thanks for inviting me to talk in this great symposium. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to Helen that she set the stage for me talking about all digital health technologies that is going on right now in neuromodulation and in all different aspects of healthcare, and all the organizing committee and also great speakers. I really enjoyed the talk so far. I'm going to talk about application of artificial intelligence in predicting pain perception and spinal cord stimulation therapy response in chronic pain. So let's move from depression to pain. That's another area that many people suffer from. I want to disclose that I'm current employee and shareholder at Abbott Laboratories. As Abbott, we developed the neuromodulation devices for chronic pain and movement disorder therapies. We are a global leader in chronic pain solutions. We have a unique pain management portfolio, including radio frequency ablation, burst spinal cord stimulation, dorsal root ganglion stimulation for chronic pain patients, and for Parkinson and essential tremor, and hopefully soon for our depression, we would have deep brain stimulation or infinity system. We are actively working on digital health technologies, and we are developing a lot of products in that aspect that I would like to talk about today. We are in a very good era. We can use remote care and we can leverage a lot of artificial intelligence since we have advances in software, hardware, and AI. These advances created an ideal ecosystem for integrated digital health with neuromodulation. As you know, there are a lot of new technologies in big data, bringing IoT as well as modern applications that can help in digital health. There are estimated 50 million chronic pain patients in the US, and they have limited access to care. It's very important for us to create applications that make them more accessible to healthcare. 3.6 million of people every year in the United States diagnosed with different chronic pain problems that they can't use medical care due to transportation barriers. This is not only good for digital health, it's not only good for the patient, but also, as you know, it's very important for providers, and we can provide them with data for therapy management. Many physicians use digital technology to manage patients and track their patient-reported outcomes, and they believe that digital technologies impact patients' quality of life. Percent of trial and permanent spinal cord stimulation patients are interested in using a smartphone to manage their chronic pain. And 53% of US physicians believe digital technologies have a moderate to high impact on their patients' quality of life. So with all of this, and as we all know that the importance of using digital health in neuromodulation, I would like to talk about why seamless data are important to monitor patient outcome, especially in the field of pain that I'm going to talk today. As all we know, pain is a perception. It's very subjective. We really need objective tools to reduce the bias that comes from the outcome of this questionnaire, such as numerical rating score that they call it NRS, that I'm going to talk today about. These objective tools would enable us to get away from that subjectiveness of the pain. Also, pain is a multi-parametric phenomenon. Pain influences and has a lot of comorbidities with other factors, for example, sleep, mobility, and mood. It's very important to use all different data streams to capture any of these comorbidities and come up with a holistic measure of pain. And the other aspect that is important for using seamless data to monitor patient outcome in chronic pain is the timely manner. When patients go to clinic, we only have a snapshot of their visit, while when we use the remote monitoring systems and bringing digital health technologies into picture, we can have a continuous portrait of patient status. So with putting all of these important elements together, we can understand how important it is to be able to monitor a patient outcome using seamless data. Digital health is getting benefit of using main keystones such as Internet of Things, bringing sensor data real time to our environment, to our backend or infrastructure. Using artificial intelligence made us enable to use sophisticated algorithms to predict outcomes, so to build predictive models. Also, being able to develop sophisticated backend and pipelines to bring big data and a lot of different tools that right now recently are easy to get access, made these digital health applications more feasible. Our goal in Abbott for using digital health technologies in chronic pain is to develop trustworthy and unbiased outcome measures for the patient. We really want to redefine the success. We want to move away from NRS and to be able to include holistic well-being for the patient. Also, we would like to predict which patients will respond long-term. It's very important to find the right candidates before even introducing them to the implant, as well as simplifying care to increase therapy longevity and reliability. So with all of these, we are working very intense on developing digital health technologies in for chronic pain patients and in different areas in neuromodulation. Today, I would like to talk about the recent study that we completed, and we enrolled patients for that study from about 2 years ago. And that is our first biowearable study called Reality Sub-Study. The objective for this study was to get away from NRS, to come up with the feasibility of measuring all of the physiological and behavioral markers that we could collect from a smartwatch throughout the patient experience from baseline to 6-month implant. So every patient have got one Apple Watch, and we have been collecting health kit data from the patients real time every day throughout the study for 6 months. Patient had at 3 months and 6 month clinic visit as well as at baseline, and they all got spinal cord stimulators, proclaimed spinal cord stimulators from Abbott. We enrolled 20 patients in 6 sites, 15 male and 5 female. You see their demographic here. And what we did, we developed the full backend pipeline, end-to-end backend, to bring data real time from these Apple Watches to our backend. So the data from Apple Watch include activity, heart rate, different heart rate measures, and an NRS value that patient would enter every day to their watch. We have been collecting patient-reported outcomes that are a standard of care for pain patients, such as PCS, PROMIS-29, PHQ-9, PGIC, and all of this data also real-time would come to our cloud infrastructure. We also collected programming data, X-ray, and questionnaires in clinic. And all of this data got aggregated with all different data streams that we collected throughout this study for 6 months. You may be interested to see how patient compliance was in this sub-study that we did. As you can see, the number of days on this chart and during the baseline and post-implant on the top plot, and at the bottom, you see per patient. The blue color shows the baseline days that patient have been wearing watch, and the orange shows the time that they have been wearing after implant. And as you can see, we had a very good patient compliance. We collected a lot of questionnaire. Usually when we don't use this remote monitoring system, we only can collect 2 or 3 in clinic throughout the 3 visits that they go. But here we at least had 10 data points from each patient, and we had a high patient compliance for both watch usage as well as on the survey data. The patient-reported outcomes throughout the study, I would like to talk about a few aspects of it. Here on this plot, you see NRS, that is the pain values patient reported every day. And since we have collected this data very continuously every day, you see high resolution in this data. The purple color, the purple bubbles show the baseline period when patient haven't got the implant, and the blue color shows the time that patient got the implant. And as you can see, patient had a very good pain relief across the study, and we could, with high resolution, we could measure it. And what I have plotted here is monthly to just create an easier visualization. The size of bubbles show the number of patients, and as you can see, it was very consistent, the patient compliance throughout the study. So we had a very good pain relief from average of 7 across all the patients. We reached to about 3 by the end of the study. Patient global indication of change is a way of measuring patient satisfaction, and as you can see, patient better by the 3 months and continuation of the therapy. And in this plot, I just wanted to present all the other questionnaire and aspects that we collected throughout the study with high resolution that we could collect this throughout our patent application. Patient pain catastrophizing, PHQ-9, that is a measure of depression, ODI, that is a measure of disability, fatigue, sleep disturbance, all showed decrease over time, and social role, that is the reverse, in a reverse scale, showed increase in patients' social role across the study. We really were interested to use all the different possible data streams to predict pain, and one of them were Apple Watch. So we tried a lot of different machine learning algorithms, and the goal of the study was coming up with the best predictive model to predict pain. As you know, there are several factors that can affect pain in chronic pain patients. So we not only included the data that we could collect from the smartwatch, but we also included other data streams such as weather and seasonality, demographic information, medical information, as well as even stock market, moon phase in the study. So here you can see the data analytics pipeline, the data that we collected from Apple Watch, including heart rate, distance, walking, running, heart rate variability, a step count, and stand time, got augmented with the other data sources that could be important, including weather data, moon phase, stock data, and the data from programming from the patient devices. So all of these were used to create machine learning models to predict pain. We did in the same manner, we did classification models for all different questionnaires that we had, that we could create machine learning models with very high accuracy. What I would like to present here is the pain model and using objective measures that we could predict pain throughout the study for the 6 months. And what you can see here, the input for this model was the objective data and also the pain history, as it has a very important impact on the pain prediction. What we learned from this study was we can, with a high accuracy, 83% F1 score, we can predict pain from the patients throughout the study. And as you can see here on the feature importance plot, in both SHAP value as well as what we got from random forest feature importance plot, the pain history, including last day NRS and last 2 days of NRS, showed up as the main 2 features, and some features that we engineer that show the progress showed up as another important feature. We also saw that programming and wearable features are among the top predictors, as well as we saw heart rate features showed up as important. predictors for predicting pain. What I would like to present here is another model that we developed to predict patients' response to therapy, if the patient would be a responder or not responder based on the PGIC values. And as you can see, we had an accuracy of about 83% to predict this responsiveness to therapy. The features that showed up here were across activity and heart rate metrics that could show patient satisfaction with therapy in both random forest feature importance plot as well as SHAP value importance plot. Programming data and weather information also showed up as important feature, and that's interesting because there are studies that show that weather and temperature play roles in chronic pain. There are a lot of literatures that support the findings from and the insights that we got from the important features for predicting PGIC. We did the same thing for other PROs, and we could generate models with high predictivity for all of them. At the end, due to time, I'm just going to present what the main conclusion of the sub-study was. First of all, we saw that seamless data can be used to predict pain level. The wearable devices can be used to track activity, sleep, and well-being. And we can use baseline data to predict patients' response to therapy. That is very important to finding the right candidates and directing them to the right therapy. At the end, I want to thank you all for listening to me and for your attention. And also, I want to say a huge thank you to my manager, Dr. Erica Ross, who always support our novel ideas and developments, to the scientists in applied research team and clinical team for helping me to lead the study and collect all of this data, and to my data science team to analyze the data and get these meaningful insights. This picture is all scientist team in front of Abbott House in Abbott Park in Chicago, and by that I have put my email information here for anybody that is interested to keep in touch for all of our developments that we are doing, and I'm love to answer any question that you might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kyani, for this wonderful talk. Any questions from the audience? Questions? I think I will go to check that. Okay, we can go to the chat.
Okay, here we go. Yeah. What's here?
I see the question here in the chat. That's a very good question. The disconnect that could be between the patient perception of pain and the specialist not being able to pinpoint a cause, and disregarding the experience. Actually, I believe that we can capture that using this technology. The reason is what we are today. I show was only using a smartwatch. We have a lot of sophisticated development right now going on that we use a lot of video data, facial expression, as Helen mentioned. We can capture not only pain and activity metrics. We have ways to capture sleep information and also the mood from the patient face, from their gait. So with having all of these different information, we definitely can have the very close, accurate estimation of patient pain. And I agree, it might not be 100% accurate for all the patients, because that could be a lot of different elements, but bringing a lot of data together and trying to curate them and understand the whole story would enable us to get much closer over time.
Okay,
There's another question here.
next one.
Yes.
Oh, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very nice talk. Can you compare this way of intervention compared to the traditional pharmaceutical interventions, like how much the industry spends on pharma versus devices, and the side effects with both these systems?
I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear you hear the question very well.
Okay.
To
Yeah.
repeat.
Yeah, the question is a comparison between pharmaceutical interventions and this approach that you are just presenting with the digital hub in terms of the cost and side effects.
Very good question. There is no cost actually. What we can do is everybody right now is using a wearable, right? We are thinking even to take these inside our IPGs, not even like patients wearing it. These data streams can come seamlessly, like everybody is using their phone, so we can capture easily their facial expression. So this technology is getting very seamless. So there would be no cost related to patient need to pay more money to get access to the technology. Even there are ways right now to get reimbursement for this therapy for the remote monitoring. So comparing this to traditional intervention, actually physicians also love to see patients' data. So that would enable them to see more patients to be able to diagnose the right patients in the right time, and be patient clinician in the loop would help us to have a better therapy efficacy over time. So this is very seamless, and I believe there is no change in what we have been doing before in terms of adding any cost to the therapy.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Kyani, for this wonderful talk, and we will move to the next speaker. And it's a great pleasure and honor to have Dr. Yazdan-Shahmorad from the University of Washington. She's going to talk about the engineering plasticity in primary cortex using optogenetics. Wonderful to see you.
Are you sharing? Yes.
Okay, there you go. Right.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thanks for having me here. In my lab, we build novel neural technologies and hope to use them to develop therapies for neurological disorders. In particular, we are interested in engineering plasticity towards targeted reorganization of the brain. And we are focusing in stroke, but I want to say the technologies we're developing can be used for a wide variety of neurological and neuropsychiatric disorders. But let's focus on stroke. As you might know, stroke is one of the leading causes of long-term disability, and current treatments provide only modest benefits. Over the past couple of decades, people have used neuromodulation, and they investigate neuromodulation as a therapy for stroke, and techniques such as magnetic stimulation or electrical stimulation. However, the effectiveness of these techniques has been a matter of debate. You might be familiar with the failed Everest clinical trial. I'm showing a photo from their setup, where the goal was to combine epidural cortical stimulation with rehabilitation to accelerate recovery from stroke. The third phase of this clinical trial failed to show efficacy between patients that received stimulation versus control group. And I actually was involved in this clinical trial as a part of my PhD. And from my perspective, some of the reasons behind the failure of this clinical trial and some of the concerns that exist in the field about using brain stimulation for stroke comes from the fact that the majority of these studies, in the majority of these studies, stimulation was not specific and wasn't impacting large areas of the brain. Also, it was open loop, meaning that the dynamics of neural activity and behavior were not incorporated in generating these stimulation protocols. And we also don't have a good understanding for the underlying mechanisms of stimulation-induced plasticity. As you might know, optogenetics is this new neuromodulation technology that has several advantages over other neuromodulation technologies and can potentially address some of these challenges. And I assume a lot of you are familiar with optogenetics, but I'm just going to briefly go over it in case we have someone who's not familiar. So there are these light-sensitive ion channels that come from certain type of algae. You can genetically modify neurons and place these on the surface of the neuron. So by shining light, you can control their activity. You can activate or deactivate them. Going back to my original discussion, let's see what are the advantages of optogenetics. One main advantage is cell type specificity, meaning that we can control the activity of specific cell type with high spatial and temporal control. We can have inhibition as well as excitation, so we can have multicolor optogenetics. And we can also have artifact-free recording, which is a very important feature because it enables us to investigate direct effects of stimulation, but also it enables us to do closed loop stimulation. And so all of these makes optogenetics a powerful tool to study the brain and its networks. And if we combine that with behavioral capabilities of non-human primates, then we might be able to answer fundamental questions about the brain function or develop therapies for neurological disorders. So during my postdoc, I developed a large-scale interface for optogenetics in non-human primates by combining 3 technologies. And I'm going to explain each of those technologies. So the first one, we use convection-enhanced delivery that enabled us to achieve high levels of optogenetic expression across large brain areas in the large brains of these animals. And so this is a pressure-based infusion technique, and we co-infuse our virus with, I'm not sure how. Okay, the cursor is not showing up. So I think I could just point up there.
No, because we know it on the screen. So you have to go down over here. Click on laser pointer. Come on. There we go.
Yeah,
there you go.
Okay, thank you so much.
If you do it there, it'll go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we co-infuse our virus with an MR contrast agent, and we were able to monitor the infusion. And here, down here, I'm showing histology analysis that is actually confirming that we had large expressing areas. And this technique was orders of magnitude improvement over the time of infusion and also the area that we were getting expression. The second technology was now we wanted to have optical access to these expressing areas, and this was artificial dura, which is a clear silicone-based material that provides optical access to the brain. And so the optical access is for light delivery for optogenetic stimulation, but it also enables us to do imaging. So here I'm showing an example of epifluorescent imaging that enables us to see where we are seeing expression. And this is an in vivo confirmation of our large expression. And so here's the virus that we've used. I briefly want to say that we were targeting excitatory cells, and the opsin we were using was an excitatory opsin, meaning that when we were shining light, we were activating or exciting the network. And then the third technology was microelectrocorticography or micro-ECOG arrays. So we designed and implemented them to be semi-transparent, and they sit on the surface of the brain and provide recording from the underlying network. And then we could place our light sources on top of this and stimulate. So this interface provided a very nice platform for us to see, can we use optogenetics to change connectivity in primate cortex, right? And so we were focusing in sensory motor cortex. We had a very simple stimulation design based on the Hebbian learning model. We either were stimulating in motor or somatosensory cortex. We had 5 10-minute blocks of stimulation that were interleaved with baseline recordings, so we could monitor how our network is being impacted by stimulation. And so let's see how it worked. Here I'm showing 2 example functional connectivity maps where the blue dot shows the location of stimulation and the diameter of the red circles show the strength of connectivity of that location with this location of stimulation that's shown in blue. So those are two examples. And then now the white circles show the strength of connectivity after 50 minutes of stimulation. And as you can see here in these two example maps and across our experiments and animals, we see that we were able to significantly strengthen functional connectivity between these two brain areas using optogenetics. And so this was very exciting because for the first time, we showed that using optogenetics, we can change functional connectivity between brain areas in non-human primates. However, I have about 100 electrodes I'm recording from these areas. And if I wanted to see what is happening between each pair, then that was a more complicated problem. But if you remember from my earlier slides, what I mentioned was one of the advantages of optogenetics is that we can record during stimulation. So we started seeing that, okay, let's see what is happening during stimulation. And we generated these maps where this like enlarged map is the coherence of that electrode with all of the other electrodes across the array. So that large map is telling us what is happening during stimulation. And then we generated a similar map for how the network changed following stimulation. And the remarkable result we found was that if you compare these two maps together, or if you compare the color patterns of these larger maps, they're actually very similar. And indeed, we found a linear relationship between them that was consistent across animals and experiments. Now, as I mentioned, this was a very simple stimulation paradigm, right? We had one laser either in motor or in sensory cortex. And so we were thinking, what happens if we, make more complicated patterns? So we add more lasers, or if we, change the delay between the lasers. But what we found was that no matter how complicated our pattern of stimulation, as long as we knew what was going on during stimulation, we could predict how the network was changing after stimulation. And so this was also an exciting result, but you could tell me that, okay, if I want to change the brain in this particular way, then what should I do? How should I stimulate the brain? And that is a question that my student, Julian Block, has been trying to answer. And he has been working with mathematicians and statisticians at University of Washington to build a model that allow nonlinearity between the inputs of his model and the output would be predicting functional connectivity change following stimulation. And so his models had inputs that were coming from both stimulation per call, as well as features that were coming from the underlying network, underlying brain functional connectivity of the network. And so here are examples of, the mapping from features, which I'm not going to go through those, but what I want to bring up here is that one, his model was doing a good job. So the R-squared of his model was around 0.4. But more interestingly, the majority of the changes was explained through features that were coming from the functional connectivity of the network rather than the stimulation protocol. And so I'll show you an example to kind of make this more clear. So here's an example of functional connectivity change that's shown through coherence as a measure of functional connectivity. So this is what we see. And if we have only stimulation protocols as an input to his model is actually doing a poor job. But if we combine network features with stimulation protocol features, now his model is doing a relatively good job. Like you can see the comparison between the two. And so this is suggesting that actually it's very important to study the functional connectivity of the underlying network that we are stimulating and incorporating that into generating stimulation protocols. Okay, so initially when I was talking about optogenetics, I mentioned excitation and inhibition. And so with excitation, we showed that, yes, we can change the network by excitatory optogenetics. And the other question is that, okay, can we change the network with inhibitory optogenetics? And if we can do that, then we can generate more, complicated patterns. And to do that, we have also been working to optimize our large-scale optogenetic interface. So I'm going to take a few minutes and explain how we optimize the interface before I show you the data on the inhibitory optogenetics. So we have been working with Ripple Neuro to print platinum particles into our artificial dura. Another cool thing about this technology is that if you look here, there are no PCBs here. That allows us to hold these arms into the chamber, when we are not recording. And when we want to record, then we can clamp connectors to these arms and record. And then another advancement we did with the interface was that we built LED arrays that now allow us for 16 independent locations of stimulation so that we can generate more sophisticated patterns. We built them in different colors and they're compatible with our multimodal artificial dura. So we implanted this in 2 monkeys. I'm showing only data from 1 monkey, but I want to say that the data was replicated in the second animal. So this is implanted in posterior parietal cortex, which is involved in multisensory integration. And here we have an inhibitory opsin jaws. And again, you see the epifluorescent imaging and large expression that we have. And so it was validated through neurophysiology, but more exciting data is that this area of the brain, as I said, is involving multisensory integration, and lesions in this area have shown to impact reach and grasp. So in a center outreach task, 50% of the trials, we are deactivating PPC. And so what we're seeing is that this deactivation increases the reach time. And so this is also an exciting preliminary data. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that we're seeing behavioral correlation with optogenetics in a context of a reach. But then going forward with that question of can we use inhibitory optogenetics to change connectivity? This is a preliminary analysis of 1 monkey that is showing that during stimulation, here we are decoupling the site of stimulation from the rest of the network. But what we see is that impact lasts beyond the stimulation. And so this is showing the feasibility of weakening the connection. If you were remembering from the results from my excitatory optogenetics, we were strengthening the connection between the location of stimulation and the rest of the network. And now here we are weakening the connection. And so this combination is paving a path for us towards this targeted reorganization of the brain that we can use for functional recovery for neurological disorders such as stroke. And I said functional recovery and I said stroke, but everything I've shown you so far has been on a healthy brain. So we have been working on incorporating a model of stroke into our interface. This is based on the photothrombotic technique. The way this technique works is that you inject a dye IV and the dye will be everywhere in the bloodstream. And then anywhere that you shine light, you can create an ischemic lesion. So we implemented this in 7 macaques. Here's a surface of sensory motor cortex. We collaborated with Ricky Wang at UW BioE to use optical coherence tomography angiography and image the blood flow in the microvasculature. After that, we injected the dye and we illuminated these areas. And 4 hours after illumination, we were able to see that blood flow had stopped in the areas that we illuminated, confirming that we had an ischemic lesion. We also performed histology analysis to show that we had cell death and neuronal death in those areas. And then because our multimodal artificial nerve was semi-transparent, we could also induce the stroke as we were recording neurophysiology and just monitor how the brain activity was changing. So here I'm showing baseline for 1 animal. This is post-stroke, so the activity goes down. This is the area that we had the lesion. So you see the change, and if we categorize the change, we see areas that the activity goes down, areas that the activity doesn't change, and areas that the activity goes up. And we see the same pattern for our second animal. And so this enables us to do this type of, for example, categorization and color coding and see how this activity was changing across time. And so here you see all the channels together. This is when we start illuminating and the lesion is forming. And as you can see, after the lesion formation, these red areas that were on top of our lesion, they stay low and we see some sort of compensatory activity. I think the battery is dead. Oh yeah, sure.
Back up.
Thank you. Right. So, so you see that, the lesion areas that stays down. And I want to emphasize that this can be done in the same paradigm of our large-scale optogenetic interface. And I want to end by saying, where are we going with these technologies? So we have a collaboration through an R01 with the lab of Meysam Chamazar at the Carnegie Mellon University, where we're building a smart dura. The goal is to build this flexible dura that can replace the native dura and enables us to have high density recording and high density both electrical and optical stimulation. So here I'm showing the first generations of the smart dura, and it was validated in our animals, and also you can see here the transparency of these electrodes. So they're giving us a really good optical access to the brain, and you can see some of the traces of the electrodes here. We have also been working on, generating or building more dense LED arrays that can enable like high sophisticated patterns of stimulation. We have 2 posters on this coming up at SFN. And I also want to say that the combination of these technologies we have been building with the potentials of optogenetics, behavioral capabilities of non-human primates, our stroke model, provides a lot of opportunities for us to explore in this area of, targeted reorganization of the brain and engineering plasticity. With that, I want to thank all of the amazing people in my lab, the people who help with animal care, our collaborators, our funding agencies, and none of this would have been possible without the help and cooperation of our monkeys. And lastly, I just want to take a few seconds and say we have a postdoc position available in my lab, and so not only they get to work with all of these cool technologies, but we have a very fun and welcoming lab. American Heart Association has the Wear Red Day every year, which to raise awareness for heart disease and stroke. And so we all wear red and we take a photo in the shape of a heart. And this is in February, so I wanted to show you that this is Seattle in February. So, please contact me if you're interested in this position, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. Any questions or comments from audience? Please.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm still a bit busy on stuff we are seeing. It's really, really cool. I think it's quite amazing. And I just have a curiosity about the timing of the stimulation, pair of stimulation. Is that important? Can you comment on that? Or is there like an ideal delay of stimulation?
Yeah, so I actually didn't go through like the paired stimulation paradigms we have done, but traditionally, a lot of this was coming from the spike timing dependent plasticity paradigm, which if you are stimulating within a particular delay between the two, and depending on if you're going postsynaptic versus presynaptic, which one comes first, then you get excitation versus inhibition. In our setup, it's a little complicated to do that, simply because we have Icahn and we have LFP recording, so we're not at the spike level. And so we have tried to implement that with like paired stimulation of, stimulating with short delays and stimulating with long delays. And we do see some degree of, agreement with spike timing dependent plasticity, but we see some of the, times that we don't see that. And that was what, motivated us to do those network analysis. And that's what we found, that it's actually kind of like you can think about it, the network state or the functional connectivity of the network that also plays a role. And it's not just the delay between the stimulation locations.
Okay. One more question, Jeff.
Thank you, Azadeh, for that talk. It's really interesting to see the update. I wanted to know a little bit more about what you were doing when you were using the optogenetic simulation to repress activity to see if you could create functional connectivity changes. Could you just talk through a little bit more about what the paradigm is now? Were you suppressing activity at all sites, or were you triggering stimulation at one side and then suppressing it the other? What were, in that same timing sort of window, what were you exactly doing there?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. And I should be clear on that. So that's thanks for that feedback. So this is only single site stimulation. So we're showing that if you do one location of stimulation, we're decoupling that and that persists.
Gotcha. Sorry. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
I think we conclude